Hello, my name is Terry Putney. I'm the CEO of Transition Advisors. We're a national consulting firm working exclusively with accounting firms on ownership transition issues. Most of what we do involves mergers and acquisitions, succession planning, and working with owner agreements for accounting firms. I hope you're able to join me on June 8th for a webinar that I'll be presenting titled Partnership and Shareholder Agreements 101. If you'd like to register for that webinar, you can do so on this email or by going to our website, www.transitionadvisors.com, and register there. In the event you're unable to attend, I prepared this short summary of some of the highlights of what we'll be talking about during the webinar. One of the big issues that everybody seems to have on their mind, of course, when it comes to their owner agreement is, what is my interest in my firm worth? In other words, what's the multiple? We get that question all the time, whether it's an external or an internal transaction. And I should tell you that first, the way to look at this is to remember that the value in your total value in your accounting firm is made up of two pools. One is the tangible assets, the receivables, the WIP, your cash, your fixed assets, and so forth, net of your liabilities, what you would normally have on your accrual basis balance sheet. And the other is the intangible value. And that's what most of us focus on, or put most of our focus on. When we talk about a firm being worth 1x or being worth 80% of revenues or whatever, however we define it, we are talking about the intangible value in most firms. So typically what we're finding in the market right now, based on all the benchmarking surveys that have been done, is the intangible value in most accounting firms runs between 75% and 90% of revenues, regardless of how intangible value is determined. The most important issue, though, is to remember is that whatever you decide your firm is worth, the terms and the total value need to be affordable for the buyout. And to be considered affordable, it needs to be self-funding, because your partners are unlikely to want to go out and borrow money or take a big hit in compensation for a long period of time in order to buy you out. So in order to do the assessment of whether your plan is affordable, it's important to look at what you're using to fund the buyout. And that's primarily coming from your foregone compensation. So we start with that, a retiring partner's compensation, plus the benefits and other costs of the partner being in the firm. And we deduct from that the cost of the labor necessary to replace that partner. Now, typically that's tied to the billable production that the partner has in the firm. And oftentimes it's about 40% of that billable production. That net number then, that net capital that's available, is used to do two things. One is actually conduct the buyout, pay for the buyout, and the other is to leave enough behind for the remaining partners so that this appears to be, will motivate them to actually execute the plan and create some upside for other activities such as admitting new partners. You know, how we determine the intangible value generally falls into four different categories. One is the book of business method, which is basically paying each partner for the book of business that they manage in the firm, similar to what you do if you're buying a book of business off the street. The most popular method is the equity method, which is looking at the ownership each partner has times the theoretical value for the overall firm, oftentimes determined by a multiple of revenues. Let's say that's 1x. If you own 30% of the ownership, you own 30% of that intangible value determined as 1 times revenues. The next most popular method is the multiple of compensation method, and this tends to be used, the larger the firm, the more there's a tendency to use this method. Those multiples run anywhere from 2 to 3 times average compensation. And oftentimes, 3 times comp in a firm that's earning 33% profit margin is basically the same as 1x. And then there's a fourth emerging method that is becoming more and more popular, and that's the AAV method or unit method. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a second. Now, between those four methods, about 1/6 of all accounting firms are still using the book of business method. Somewhere between 25 and 30% are using the equity method. About 25% are using the multiple of comp method. And then right now, about 10% are using the unit method. The rest are either are doing something else similar, which might include, for instance, a fixed payment a plan, or only paying for capital or something like that. Let me talk a little bit more about the AAV method, because this is something that we're using increasingly in the work that we do for firms as they transition from an owner agreement that isn't working for them any longer to a new one. And this is typically an issue related around buying out senior partners. What we sometimes find is that the concentration of ownership has occurred over the years because equity never was used for anything other than a buyout. No buyout has occurred. So we run into situations commonly where we have 2 or 3 partners that might own as much as 80 or 90% of the equity, typically, obviously, the founding partners, with 3 or 4 other partners owning the rest of the firm. And again, this hasn't been an issue because it's never been used for anything. But now all of a sudden a buyout occurs, and now there's a problem because the buyout won't be affordable. It doesn't seem fair. The AAV method is a hybrid of the equity method. And the way it works is that we establish a number of units that are tied directly to the volume of the firm. If you've got a $3 million firm, we'd establish 3 million units. And what we're in essence doing is separating the intangible value and the allocation of intangible value from the ownership in the firm. So I might own 30% of the equity of the firm, which would be tied directly to the tangible assets, but own a different percentage, probably a lower percentage, of the intangible value. And the real key to this is because these are units and because we're not having to legally change ownership in the firm, we can allocate them in a much more flexible manner. So, and we can do that on an annual basis. So as the volume of the firm increases, the units increase, and that increase can be allocated to partners in some fashion that works under the circumstances for you. As you buy out partners, you're reacquiring those units and you're redistributing them to other partners. So what happens is the younger partners who feel like they've been left out of being recognized for their sweat equity in the equity method are now being rewarded for that sweat equity by doing 2 things: helping the firm grow and helping the firm stay viable as it goes through buyouts of senior partners. The senior partners, on the other hand, who feel like I really don't want to give up anything that I've earned up to the point where we're admitting new partners, aren't asked to do that. They're only asked to share in a different way with the future growth of the firm. Again, I hope that you can join us on June 8th for the webinar. If you can't, there should be a recording that will be posted on our website under the CPE tab of the webinar a couple days after the webinar is presented. Thanks for your attention, and again, hope to see you on June 8th.